Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have over 300 people registered and listening. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dan Foreman and I am hosting the webinar discussion, cryptically titled, Why the Answer to Your Question is Mobile. Answering that question today will be Andy Lees, Product Director at Lumi Mobile. Andy has over 20 years experience managing technology and data for the consumer insight industry. He spent 11 years at Kantar, where he worked in global innovation. Andy's presented at numerous platforms and conferences on mobile research and other market research topics, and he was one of the first in the industry to recognize that mobile would revolutionize market research. Two small housekeeping points. First is that this webinar is being recorded, so you can listen back on demand or share with your colleagues. The second, if you wish to ask any questions of Andy, then please post them in the chat area on the chat icon from the GoToWebinar. So presenting mobile today, Andy's presenting in a mobile fashion. He's presenting from his coastal property where he has views from the UK to France. And so having introduced him, I will pass over directly to him. So Andy's about to enter the stage.
Okay, hello. Thanks for that nice low-key introduction there, Dan. Right, I'm going to be talking about why the answer to your question is mobile, and particularly in a market research context. So what we're going to run through today is, first of all, I'm going to go through some mobile stats. I know you've heard a lot of mobile stats before and we keep throwing them out there, but we never seem to tire of them as well. Never seem to tire of hearing those big numbers. So I'll throw a few more out there, as is tradition in this type of presentation. I'll talk about some of the mega trends that are affecting both the business and the consumer landscape, the big trends that are changing all our lives, and go into some of the details of how they're relevant for market research, and particularly, as the title suggests, why the answer to all of them is mobile. Then I'm going to follow up on a question that I often get asked, which is, are people really doing all this mobile stuff, and what are they doing? So I'll try and answer that question for you today. Also, some people sometimes get excited about mobile and then find a couple of barriers. So we'll talk about what some of those barriers are and some of the ways that you can overcome them. And there's a final extra bonus and freebie. I'm going to tell you all what the future looks like, no strings attached. So, okay, getting started with the stats. As I said, we've heard a lot of these stats before, myself included, yet they never seem to lose their impact. The growth of mobile and the continued growth of mobile has been predicted year in, year out, yet expectations continue to be exceeded. So we can see here that mobile data usage in the US doubled within the last year. And if people think, one of the things that sometimes people often say with mobile is, yeah, it's great, it's cool, but is there really any money in it? Is it a serious business? And so I'll throw out the stats from eBay there as reference to that. eBay also seeing doubling year on year. So this year, the amount of transactions that they expect to see through mobile devices across the eBay and PayPal properties to exceed 20 billion US dollars. more than double what it was last year. And if 20 billion isn't a meaningful amount of money for any of you, then I'd like to know which company you work for. One of the stats that I thought was really interesting was that SMS usage in the last quarter fell in the US for the first time ever. So from when we very first started getting addicted to our mobile phones, using text-speak, and discovering just quite how dexterous our thumbs were, or not in the case of some of us, SMS usages continue to rise year on year, and now it is, for the first time, it has fallen, and that's been attributed to the increasing use of apps, of instant messaging, of social apps, status updates, tweets, and all the other kind of instant digital ways that we have to communicate, has finally tipped the tide on the good old stalwart of the SMS message. More than 6 billion mobile subscribers in the world. I should say mobile subscriptions actually, because some people do have multiple SIMs. So the number of actual subscribers is lower than that. Somewhere over 4 billion, around 85% of the world's population is reckoned to be accessible by a mobile phone. Interestingly, only 1 billion of those are smartphone owners. I say only 1 billion. A billion is still a significant number of people, probably in anyone's book. But it is an interesting point that there are still a large number of mobile users who don't have smartphones, and if you're thinking about a market research campaign where you need to reach a broad number of people, you still need to take into account those non-smartphones. And I'm sure you'll excuse me a little plug if I mention that the Lumi survey mobile app does, of course, reach right across feature phones and as well as smartphones. So anyway, just a little plug there, apologies. Now, of those 6 billion, more than 1 billion of those mobile phone subscribers are in China, and almost 1 billion of them are in India. So that's nearly a third of the world's mobile population in India and China. And last quarter, 22% of smartphone shipments to China. So these markets are clearly huge, sophisticated, growing, increasingly sophisticated, increasingly important in a mobile world. Now, a collection of statistics that I found particularly interesting were these ones here around native apps versus HTML5. So last year there was a big debate. A lot of the kind of mobile debates and mobile research debates were around HTML5 versus native apps. Native apps being the apps that run on specific handsets, so an Android app for an Android phone, or an Apple app for an Apple phone. It was kind of widely predicted last year that this year would see HTML5 apps overtaking native apps, and Facebook was one of the poster children of the move to HTML5. They ditched their native apps and they said HTML5 is the way to go. Then a couple of months ago, Mark Zuckerberg came out and said that their biggest mistake of the year was betting too much on HTML5, and that had distracted their development approach, used up their resources in the wrong direction, and that actually it's worth going and reading this article. Actually, it's an interesting article. They do of course believe that HTML5 is valuable, and that they would like to move to an HTML5 approach, but that HTML5 isn't the best approach right now. It isn't ready yet, which is similar to our view at Lumi. We think there's a lot of value in HTML5. Being able to do things cross-platform very cheaply, very quickly is something that's appealing to all of us. But at the moment, HTML5 isn't able to access the features and the functionality of the phone in the same way as native apps are. And a point that's made in the Facebook statement is that the companies that are producing the phones and the phone systems and the operating systems, like Apple, have a vested interest to ensure that the latest features and the latest functionality of the phones are available in native apps first, because that's what pays their bills. So a bit of a technical aside there. From a consumer point of view, the choice is also clear. We can see there that the time spent in apps doubled again last year, whereas time in the browser was flat. And if you look at the numbers in that study, you'll see that time in apps is around 5 times the amount of time in the browser. So consumers also still have a strong appetite for apps. It was borne out in a different study, slightly different figures, but same conclusion in a study by Comscore. I remember a couple of years ago putting together a slide for a presentation similar to this, and at that time the Apple App Store had just broken 1 billion downloads, and that seemed like an incredible number, and certainly it is. But now the App Store downloads over 1 billion apps every single month. Absolutely astonishing numbers, and the Android Google Play Store does a similar number of downloads. So appetite for apps absolutely continues to be unabated. Okay, moving on now to talk about some of the mega trends that are affecting our lives, affecting us as consumers and as business people. I don't call them mega trends merely to be dramatic, although my slide might suggest otherwise. The reason I call them mega trends is to distinguish them from fads or fashions that come and go. These trends or mega trends are long-term trends that will continue to affect us for years and years, affecting almost every aspect of our lives. I'll run through them briefly at a high level now, and then we'll talk through how they impact the research environment and how mobile is relevant for each of them. So firstly, digital everything. In the last 5 years, a huge number of the things that we interact with in our lives have been digitized. If we think about photos, magazines, newspapers, books, to some extent TV, radio, maps and the way we navigate, plus. Looking back, the timescale is incredibly short. As I say, around 5 years, yet we're already accustomed to doing all these things digitally. 5 years back, probably, very few of us had a GPS, let alone having a GPS on our phone that we used to navigate around whilst walking on foot. And this digitization of everything has overlapped to an expectation of being able to do everything everywhere. So all the things that have suddenly become digitized, my banking probably only became digitized in the last decade, but now the expectation is that I can do my banking from my phone wherever I go. Okay, multiple screens. There was another study in the US recently that suggested that 85% of US smartphone owners use their smartphone whilst watching TV. And a high proportion of those also use a tablet at the same time. So what's called two screening and even three screening is becoming not the exception but the norm. Next, this phrase, leapfrogging. So the idea of emerging markets leapfrogging. If you haven't heard the phrase, it's maybe a slightly strange one. The idea is that some markets will never build up the wide infrastructure that we've come to expect. The fixed broadband cables, the fiber optics, etc., etc. For these markets, the SIM card is the primary data connection device, whether that be on a phone or on a laptop, or increasingly on a tablet. So these markets are leapfrogging the legacy plumbing that we've become accustomed to. They'll never have it and will move ahead of us into the future of mobile communication. Big data is an interesting one. It's not. It's probably more a business trend than a consumer trend, although it does touch on all our lives as consumers. If we think about companies like Amazon, who were very early to realize the power of collecting vast amounts of data on their users and using that data to understand how they can offer them more relevant products as they shop and increase the relevancy over time using network effects to build the power of their ecosystem. Big data is somewhat of a faddy word perhaps, but I think that the underlying sentiment of using this vast treasure trove of data that we now collect to improve the way that businesses interact with consumers and make business decisions is certainly a trend that's only going to grow. Biometrics. Again, this could be considered perhaps a research-focused trend, although an exception to that, notable exception, would be in the sporting area, things like Nike Fuel and Nike Plus bands that measure various physical attributes whilst exercising and combine those with a personal digital data set, indicate that biometrics has potential to spill over into the consumer environment as well. And we'll talk a bit more in a minute about how it's relevant for research and for mobile. And finally, instant everything. All of the above I want to do now, right away. My expectation is that I never have to queue, and I can do all of the things in that list and anything that I want to do whenever I want to do it. Okay, so let's break these down a bit further. Digital everything and everything everywhere. The fact that we're doing all these things digitally, so I'm talking, when I say these things, I'm talking about banking, shopping, consuming media. I want to do this not just at home, not just in front of my PC, not just at the shops, but any of them in any of those locations on any of the screens that I have available. Mobile is the perfect device for capturing all this data, and as researchers, the fact that we're able to collect data whilst I'm shopping, how I'm feeling when I'm at the shops, how I'm feeling when I'm looking at the product that I'm talking about, capturing data about what the product looks like, and passive data about the shop environment that I'm in and the location that I'm in is incredibly powerful. We have been inundated by this wash of data, and we've only just begun to understand how to deal with it. The mobile device is certainly at the center of this trend, and is enabling us to track more than ever before. I also spoke about the idea that 85% of people are using their phones whilst watching the TV. One of the things that's really relevant for this is that TV metrics have always been difficult and expensive to collect, or they've been based on a household. The mobile device makes TV metrics personal, and it gives us a digital device to tap into the user's viewing experience. It lets us see the lens that they are viewing the TV through. Again, we're only just at the beginning of using this data in terms of collecting mobile 2 screening and 3 screening, being able to track what people do on the tablets, track what they do on the mobile, and also recording how their mobile conversation is relating to the program or the channel that they're watching. Okay, this one's probably the most straightforward of all. The emerging markets are going to be, well, they're not going to be, they are the regions with the fastest growing middle classes, and they will have the biggest middle classes in the world. Their consumer spend is increasing faster than anywhere else. They're the most interesting markets for our clients, and they're the markets that multinationals tend to understand least about. So the opportunity for research in these markets is greatest, and the way to reach people in these markets is mobile. People in these markets are never going to join an online panel because they may never have a PC. The great thing about big data is that it has made corporations understand the value of data and to expect it. So mobile, if used to track all the things that we talked about above, it throws off a huge amount of data. It's important to consider to have the appropriate tools and skill sets to manage that data, to be able to break it down for clients, and to turn it into Okay, how can I say this without using a cheesy phrase? Okay, I'll go with actionable insights. There you go. Apologies for that. But actually, this somewhat annoying word, big data, has probably done market research as an industry a favor, because more and more companies begin to understand the power of ubiquitous digital data, as we just discussed it. A number of, well, we are increasingly understanding that not all decisions are made consciously, and biometrics are giving us new insights, new data collection approaches, and new avenues for research. At the moment, I would say that the biometric tools, whether that be headsets, facial recognition, maybe other devices attached to the skin, are very crude biometric tools. I will confidently predict that those tools are going to become more and more sophisticated over time, and we're going to come to rely on the data that they throw off more and more as researchers, and in addition to the passively captured data and the survey response data that we traditionally rely on. Mobile as a tool is very well placed to capture biometric data. It's the one thing we have on us all the time. It's the first thing many of us look at in the morning. It's the last thing many of us look at before we go to bed at night. Very often the one time we don't have it is when we're in the shower. So mobile is the perfect device to be a hub for other types of biometric sensors as this technology evolves. And finally, with instant everything, the downside is that our clients want instant everything too. Their expectations have increased and will continue to do so in terms of timeliness, amongst other things. The good news is that, again, mobile is really well placed to deliver the fastest data collection approach. When people get an invite to do an activity on their phone, they tend to respond to it immediately, as opposed to when something hits a PC inbox, they may not get to it for some time, and when they do get to it, they may not feel as compelled to act on it instantly. Okay, so those are the trends that I believe are not going away. More digital everything, everything everywhere, a huge treasure trove of data for us as researchers to collect, an opportunity to collect data in emerging markets like we've never done before, and to really tap into what people are doing and how their body is reacting, in addition to the survey metrics around why they're doing something that will always be an essential part of the mix. So I know this all sounds great, and some of you will have heard it before, and the question I always get asked is, yeah, but are people really doing this? What are people doing right now in terms of mobile? So emphatically, yes, people are doing all of the above, but I think probably more importantly, what I've seen, well, over the last couple of years, certainly the mobile business has grown, interest in mobile has grown, absolutely, number of pilots have grown, certainly, but probably for me the most important thing is that the number of real paid-for projects have also grown, and we're now doing a huge volume of client paid for work with various research companies in various markets, doing real projects at scale. It says to me that that mobile is certainly here. So what sort of things are people doing? Diaries? Yep, diaries really fit with mobile, and there's something that people find that mobile can really add value to right now. So let's break that down a bit. People are doing diaries across a range of activities. So purchase behavior, consumption and usage behavior, as well as attitudes to products and services. People tend to, it's certainly in a quantitative sense, focus on one or the other of those in particular studies, rather than doing one study that tries to capture everything, but focus on a particular aspect of behavior, as the demands on users can be quite high. The other thing that people are finding they're getting value from at the moment, particularly in terms of mobile apps, is customer satisfaction studies, particularly where travel, be that by train or plane, is involved, where people want to get people's reaction to the service whilst they're there, whilst they're experiencing it, and not waiting till they get home a few days, a week, a couple of weeks later, when something else can have happened in between to change their experience or their perception. And as always, as I continue to mention, emerging markets, where huge volumes of data collection are still being done using pen and paper, with all the inaccuracies, inefficiencies, slowness and cost that's associated with that approach. So mobile is absolutely the way to improve the efficiency, speed, responsiveness of data collection in paper-based markets. So then people say, yeah, I get all that, Andy, but there's three things that are stopping me: norms, budget, and sample. So let's address those one at a time. Norms, yeah. So norms are really, they give you a great competitive advantage. They give you stickiness with your clients, and they make it hard for new entrants to compete against you. So I wouldn't disagree, norms are great. But how did you get those norms in the first place? So some number of years ago, you needed to start somewhere, and you needed to go and collect those norms. What I would suggest you need to do now is start collecting norms about mobile, get some mobile norms, and get some norms around how mobile interacts with your existing business stream. If you don't collect some mobile norms now, in a couple of years' time, your competitors are going to be the ones with the norms. They're going to be the ones with the interesting data, and they're going to be the ones with a strong relationship with the client. Next, budget. It's fair to say that a couple of years ago, good quality mobile research was expensive. To have an app developed often costs upwards of £50,000. But now with the maturity of the mobile research market, and with Lumi Survey available as a self-service product, the price of mobile research has fallen to be broadly comparable with online. You can do a mobile app survey across platforms using Lumi Survey for a few £100 and paying only on a per complete basis. Thirdly, sample. So the technology is there. You know what research you want to do. You've got a client lined up. You need to have panelists who are prepared to do research on a mobile phone. Lumi has now launched GMI has launched a panel app using Lumi. Lumi are working with other panel companies at the moment to either launch panel apps or to work in partnership to make it easier than ever to deploy a mobile survey to a mobile panel. So that's a situation that is already possible and will get easier on a daily basis. So now, finally, before we close, I'm going to tell you what the future is going to be like, and I'm not even going to add any caveats. So the future will be faster, more connected, more relevant, less personal but more personalized, more tracked and traceable. Services will be more productized and products will be service oriented. We're going to be less obsessed by screens and screen size, but content and context will be relevant as ever. Be more digital, more mobile, always on, and otherwise pretty much the same. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Andy, that's great. Thank you very much. Very interesting. And there's some discussion going on in the chat. You probably saw as well. I didn't forewarn you that we threw out a couple of quick polls, so there's some areas there to probe upon. And we've also received a couple of questions directly by email and also through Twitter. So I'll just whiz through each of these questions. We've got about 4 or 5 different topic areas, and it'll be great just to kind of focus on each one at a time. First, I'll just quickly go through the feedback from the polls. The second question we asked, you mentioned a few different ways people could use surveys, and the two which came out as the question was something along the lines of, based on everything Andy's just shared with you, which of the following ways do you think you would be most likely to use mobile? And the 2 areas which came out the most were customer satisfaction and diaries. So we then had a follow-up question from somebody saying you'd like to learn a little bit more about customer satisfaction, particularly in what Andy was talking about with travel and those sort of things. So can you share a couple of examples of customer satisfaction and diaries that you're able to share with us?
Okay, well I won't share specific examples for obvious reasons, but I'll just kind of talk generically. So at Lumi we're focused on mobile apps, and the great thing about apps is that they work offline as well as online. This has led to a number of kind of, I guess, interesting use cases where, as I said, either particularly airlines or holiday companies who want to understand various different aspects of customer satisfaction throughout the travel process, and want to be sure that people can respond to questions or interact as things happen, and do so in a way that works regardless of whether there is or isn't a connection, and regardless of whether or not they are data roaming or not. And you might imagine in a similar context, train companies or travel companies in the rail industry who are interested in equally getting feedback in scenarios where people A, may not be returning home immediately, and B, are very likely to be in areas with poor or little data connection.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andy. The other question that we put out there on the polls was, which of the following megatrends would you be most interested to hear about? And the area which was overwhelmingly voted for was big data, and then the second area, which was significant, was emerging markets. So can you also just expand upon those a couple of times? And that dovetails with another question that we've just received. What's your view on Africa vis-a-vis mobile?
Okay. Let me start with the big data then. I mean, as I said when I went through the slides, I think it's been somewhat maligned because big data is such an annoying buzzword. But the fact remains that increasing use of all these digital devices throw off more and more data. And we struggle to capture it, we struggle to process it, and as an upshot of that, we struggle to get the value out of it. Companies, as I say, like Amazon that have been successful have focused on very specific use cases. I think, I mean, my experience of this in the past has also been that managing the data is well, I guess, as most research actually, managing the process is one thing, but what you need to start with is a clear understanding of what the client question is. So starting with a clear, we're going very generic now, starting with a clear understanding of the client question can actually help cut through a lot of the complexity that technology adds in further down the line, whether that be for big data or for mobile, for biometrics, for anything else. Understanding what you're trying to achieve helps make technology decisions simple.
Okay, thanks, Andy. We also got asked a question about leapfrogging, and specifically, how do you do a mobile project if you don't have a panel?
Okay, so well, mobile, I guess, can be used in a couple of ways at the moment. So one of the ways mobile can be used is a replacement to CAPI, or as MCAPI tends to be the way that we're using it, and that would be, I guess, that doesn't require a panel, but it does immediately bring some of the benefits of electronic data collection. Additionally, MCAPI can be used as an approach to recruit for mobile face-to-face. So an interviewer with a mobile device that uses that to recruit the people either that he interviews or just as he or she interacts with as a direct recruitment exercise, to show them, to give them a link to get them the app on the phone, tell them about the rewards that they can get, and it can actually become a panel building exercise. I would also suggest that there are a lot of companies now providing panels in a wide variety of markets, and increasingly those panel companies are open to mobile and need projects, in fact, in order to feed that ecosystem. I think one of the things that has maybe held mobile back a little bit is this chicken and egg situation between the panel and the project, and that one can't come between the other, but it's an iterative cycle of building the two. So I'm sure if there are people with clients and mobile projects, they will find there are panel companies with panelists whom they want to engage on the mobile platform.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Andy. Another question's just come through, and for the reasons of time, we'll have to make this the last question for now. But of course, we're going to post this webinar, and we'll continue to take questions and share some contact details. But bearing in mind everything that you've just talked about and the various predictions which are flying around about the future, what excites you most about the next 3 years? And can you give us a hint of some of the things you see happening over the next 3 years or so?
I guess the thing that excites me the most is really seeing this ecosystem build and mature. As I said, we've already gone, we've gone through the pilot phase, and we're now into the phase of, real people doing real projects for real clients, and for real money, I might add. But what I'm excited about is really seeing that scale up further and mature, so that we have an established mobile ecosystem doing the basics, and the things that we're doing piloting on are really then beginning to push the boundaries using everything that the latest smartphones that can do, particularly maybe into the biometrics region, the blend of asking people questions, tracking what they're doing, sensing how they're feeling through biometrics, combining that data into something that is really powerful for companies. And as a technology provider, and to my point about products being services and services being products, I'd like to see us wrap that up in a way that makes it really easy for researchers to access, so that they don't have to think too much about the technology, but that it's there in a nice, clean, easy to use interface, one dashboard for data collection that can be used to suck in and aggregate information from a wide variety of sources.
Andy, that's great, thanks. And whilst you were talking, we threw out a final poll where we had a triple play group of winners on what are the things that are most likely to happen over the next few years. And perhaps two of them are more realistic and one of them might be aspirational, but I'll let you judge which is which. So the three winners were: China GDP is expected to be larger than the USA, David Beckham is expected to become the new president of the EU, and mobile is expected to become the #1 data collection source for market research. So thank you once again, Andy. Thanks for all those who attended. We will make the webinar available. We're also very happy to continue to have questions offline and to keep the conversation going. So thanks again. You're part of the revolution, and we hope to see you all soon.
Vote Beckham, yeah?